Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader. And joining me, as always, is my co-host on the podcast, Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going?
Billy Raids, how you doing, my man?
Hanging in there. It's been a busy weekend, but we're
always is, buddy. Always is.
They just fly by, Sean, don't they?
They really do, bud. They really do.
It's like before you know it, it's Sunday night and you're...
Yep, and you're getting ready for Monday morning, buddy.
Yep. Well, at least I had this podcast to look forward to.
That's right, pal. We always get the truth out.
Well, we try to anyway. I think we're doing a pretty good job of it.
I think we are, buddy. Now, tonight, Billy, we're going to have to give a little bit of a caution warning on our episode tonight because the title is going to be on Roy DeMeo and the Westies. So what I'm going to caution everybody is if, you have kids listening, make up your own decision if you want them to listen. And if, don't listen to this podcast if you just ate your dinner and, because if you got a weak stomach, maybe skip this week's episode and listen next week because, this is going to be, Bill, there's no way to do this. If you're going to do it right, you gotta be graphic and you gotta, tell the story about how vicious these two crews were, especially, Roy DeMeo and Jimmy Coonan. I mean, I've been following organized crime forever, and those two guys they're the most violent that I've ever come across in all my research on organized crime.
Without question. I think, well, we'll get into it, but Roy DeMeo was essentially a serial killer who just happened to be associated with the mob.
Well, I think, Bill, a lot of times, like, people get it wrong on these guys. Like, I don't think a lot of them enjoy killing. I think a lot of them, they see themselves as soldiers, whether, you agree with that or not, they call themselves soldiers and They see killing as part of the job description, really. And the thing is, a lot of them, the guys they're killing are their best friends. So a lot of them don't enjoy doing it. But I think these two guys truly enjoy killing people.
Yeah. And if you listen to the podcasts of the guys that have been in, quote, the life, guys like Sammy the Bull and Michael Francesi, I mean, they talk about, they say, well, we did work, right? They call it work. They say, I worked, I did work with that guy, or that guy did a lot of work. And what that means is we killed somebody, we had to kill somebody. We had to, another way I've heard them put it is took somebody off the list, right? Off the census list.
Right.
And Roy DeMeo and Jimmy Coonan took a lot of guys off the census list.
They don't even know how many these guys killed because a lot of them, they were dismembering bodies. So a lot of these were disappearances.
Well, there's a story that Sammy the Bull tells. He sat down for, and I don't know if I'm sure we'll get into this at some point in the show, but Sammy talks about an appointment that he had with Roy DeMeo and I think Louis Melito.
Right.
We're talking about the whole card scam, which I'm sure you'll get into.
Yeah, we'll get into all that, Billy. And
he said that there was a couple, I guess the books were open, meaning they were looking to make new guys.
Right.
And he said to Sammy said to Roy DeMeo, he said, do you have any of these guys that you want to propose? And DeMeo said, oh yeah. He said, I got a bunch of guys. He said, oh yeah, have they done work? And DeMeo looks at him and he goes, my I forget who.
Aaron boy, I think he said, didn't he?
He's my coffee boy.
Guy getting the coffees, yeah.
He says he's got 5 murders.
No, I think he said he has 5 hits under his belt.
Right, he's got 5. Yeah. And
unbelievable.
And Sammy the Bull said, "What?" He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "How many have you guys done?" And DeMeo said, "Oh, something like 200." And Sammy the Bull couldn't believe. I mean, they probably underestimated.
Well, the thing is, Bill, a lot of these guys, when they some of them, like in the crew, they did testify and stuff, the Westies and the DeMeo crew, and a lot of them actually couldn't remember.
Right.
That's how bad it was. They couldn't remember how many murders they were involved with.
And they weren't just killing guys that they were ordered to kill. They were killing a lot of.
Well, here's the thing, Bill. Neither one of these crews were sanctioning these, like getting these sanctioned by the higher ups in the Gambino family.
Right.
You know, they were doing these things, you know, behind the back, and we'll get into all that, Billy.
Yeah. I don't mean to get too far ahead. All right, Sean, let's talk about it.
Let's start off, Billy. So Roy DeMeo and Jimmy Coonan and Westies. So Roy DeMeo was a soldier in the Gambino family. He had his own crew, and his crew was a bunch of killers. And Iceman Kuklinski, the serial killer, was not one of them. And we'll get into that. But, you know, he had guys in the crew. He had one guy, they nicknamed him Dracula because he slept in the lounge in a casket in the basement. I mean, to make sure nobody came in at night and bugged it. I mean, these guys were unbelievable, Bill. And Jimmy Coonan was the head of the Westies, which was the Irish gang in Hell's Kitchen, who eventually took over, you know, the Irish organized crime in Hell's Kitchen, west side of Manhattan, that's existed for, you know, 100 years in that neighborhood. So let's start off with a story to set this up, Billy, of how vicious was DeMeo. So there's this young soldier in Vietnam, Dominic Montiglio, okay, and he gets out of Vietnam, and his uncle happened to be Nino Gaggi, who we mentioned on the Castellano episode. He was a captain in the Gambino family.
Right.
And Dominic, like a lot of these guys coming back from Nam, the government doesn't help him out at all. And he couldn't find work, and he was struggling with the stuff he did over there. And he ended up working for his uncle. So he gets involved in the mob life. And one of the things his uncle had him doing was he was like the guy who would go to the Westies, go to Roy DeMeo's crew, and you know, pick up the VIG, which, you know, the money they're kicking back to Nino, which he'd eventually take his cut and then kick it up to Paul Castellano. So the one night Montiglio goes over there, and again, Bill, you know, all these guys, when they talk about, you hear these guys talking about the Westies and Roy DeMeo, you don't want to say the word scared, because these guys are all hardcore criminals.
Right. They never.
But they're all leery.
Right.
That's just word. Even Sammy and Gravano on his podcast, like, he's leery of these guys. Like, he knows, you know, how bad these guys were. So anyway, Montiglio goes over there, and Roy DeMeo's there with some guys in his crew, and a couple of Westies are there, and they're eating a dinner. The DeMeo's cooking a pasta dinner with meatballs for the guys, and he's got an apron on there, and he's passing out the pasta, dishing it out. And Montiglio, he says to Montiglio, Manja, you want something to eat? And now Montiglio just wants to get the hell out of there. He doesn't want any part of these guys. He just wants to get his money for his uncle and get out of there. But he knows if he tries to do that and leave too soon, these guys might think he's wearing a wire or something. And they're, you know, he knows they're crazy and they don't care who his uncle is. So he sits down and he's eating. And all of a sudden he's looking around and he sees some of the guys have blood on their hands, Bill. So he's like, what the heck? And then he looks out of the corner of his eye and he sees that the bathroom door is open, just a crack.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks in there and there's a body hanging upside down in the bathtub. And he throws his fork down in disgust. And he's like, what the heck? And Roy DeMeo's like, what's the matter, kid? You're not hungry? And he says to Roy, he says, Roy, do you know you have a damn body hanging upside down in your bathtub? And Roy DeMeo looks back at the door at the bathroom. And then he says to Montiglio, he said, don't worry about him, kid. He's not staying for dinner. And that's what you're dealing with these guys, Bill. I mean, and the thing is, Bill, there's two books. The best book on the Westies is by T.J. English, titled The Westies. And then the best book on Roy DeMeo that I read is a book called Murder Machine. Mm-hmm. And that's a great title because that's what Roy DeMeo was. And when you read these books, Bill, it hits you like a concrete being poured on you, like how vicious these guys were. And it just, you know, and the thing is, like with DeMeo, the weird thing about it is I've seen interviews with his son, and his son talks about how Roy was like the perfect father. Like he never saw his dad raise his voice or get mad or angry. And he treated him like, you know, like he was a great father to him. Mm-hmm. And so DeMeo never brought that violence home with him. You know, so it's just a weird dynamic, Bill. Like how could a guy do that? But
that's serial killer behavior though, because
You're right.
to be able to compartmentalize and not show, and I think the other thing is you don't want to let on, right? You don't want to raise any kind of suspicion that you're doing this. I mean, if he was a maniac at home and the police were coming to the house every other day, they're going to start looking into him, they're going to start following him, and they're going to realize what the heck he's doing outside of the house.
And you're right. That's how most of these serial killers, they fit into society,
right?
And
that's how they, and again, we always talk about this with the mob. Who's the one that's going to do this to you? It's not your enemy. It's going to be your best friend that's going to kill you, because they need you to be relaxed. They need you, not to be on guard or anything. And then that's how they're going to get you. And that's the way he operated.
Right. So what these guys were doing, Bill. So the DeMeo crew and the Westies had this method of dismembering bodies. Now, the Westies would call it doing the Houdini, they call it, the disappearing act. No body, no investigation. The DeMeo crew called it the Gemini Method, but it was basically the same thing. And they called it the Gemini Method because they hung out at Roy DeMeo's Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn, which today, ironically, is a Protestant church, if you can believe that, Billy. Yeah. But anyway, what it was so Roy DeMeo would lead his victim into the Gemini Lounge, right? And he would lead him down a hallway, and he would lead him into a room, and immediately he'd have the victim going first, and then the door, it would be in darkness, and then he'd turn the lights on, and then immediately the victim would know, in the split second, he knew he was a goner, because there'll be two guys standing there, two of Roy's crew, completely naked, Bill. So they wouldn't get any blood on them. They could just take a shower and, wash it right off.
Yeah.
One guy with a gun, one guy with a knife, and the entire room was wrapped in plastic. So as soon as the guy stepped down, he knew he was on plastic. He's done.
Yep.
And the one guy would shoot him in the head, and the other guy would actually stab him in the heart, Bill, to stop the blood from pumping. And then they wrap him in plastic, and then they take him to the bathroom and hang him up in the bathtub, and they bleed him, and they drain all the blood, cut his throat, let him bleed out. And what's that?
Like a deer.
I mean, yeah. And this would take, over an hour for the body to drain blood. So this is when DeMeo would either make a meal for the guys, or they would sometimes order pizza out, and they would wait for the body to drain. And then they would have this whole system of cutting up the body and getting rid of it. So and the Westies were doing the same exact thing. And this is where the blood tie between DeMeo and Coonan comes in, and it's just absolutely vicious, Bill. This is why we can't really pin down how many people these two crews killed. I mean, I've heard everything from, like you said, the figure 200. I've heard over 1,000 between the two gangs.
Well, the thing is, they weren't just killing, and with DeMeo, he wasn't just killing. Again, he wasn't just killing on orders. He was killing people just. And what he said to Sammy the Bull was, when Sammy was didn't question him. He knew better than to question him. He just kind of, he said, you got that many orders, and DeMeo said, no. He said, what'll happen sometimes is a guy will be in the club and we'll just take care of him there just to keep the boys sharp. He actually said that. He said, just to keep them sharp. And Sammy said, oh yeah. He said, I got to keep my guys sharp too. Of course, he wasn't.
I mean, Sammy understood, even though, he was, a vicious killer himself.
Right.
For him, it was more business. For DeMeo, I think DeMeo and Coonan, I think they really enjoyed this.
I agree.
So, let's get a little bit into how actually these guys met. So what happened is we talked about in our first episode we did on the mob, the Irish organized crime has always run the west side of Manhattan, going all the way back to Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed, the political machine they had, and Oni Madden, who we talked about. And then it went on to Joe Ryan, who ran the docks, the longshoreman union there. and eventually Mickey Spillane. And this is when the war happens between Mickey Spillane and the Gambino family and the Genovese family specifically, but really the five families. And Mickey Spillane also makes an enemy in Jimmy Coonan because he shook down Jimmy Coonan's father, who was just an innocent, tax paying. He was actually a tax accountant, and he shook him down, and Jimmy Coonan never forgot that. So Jimmy Coonan's ambition in life was always to get revenge on Mickey Spillane. So Coonan starts to form a group of young Turks around him to take Spillane on. And one of the guys he recruited was another guy out of Vietnam named Mickey Featherstone. And he was a mess, Bill, from the combat he's seen over there. He was hallucinating. He was having all kind of mental problems. And then he got into heavy drug use, cocaine. He was drinking heavy. And he was violent, Bill, extremely violent. And he became Jimmy Coonan's right hand. So Roy DeMeo sees this as an opportunity because Roy is getting frustrated. Roy is making a lot of money. He's got this car scheme going where they're stealing cars and then they're selling the parts overseas, and they're making a ton of money kicking it up to Castellano. But at this point, Roy DeMeo's not made yet. He's not a made guy, and Castellano keeps pushing that off. And this is really frustrating DeMeo. And he sees this as an opportunity. If he could get Jimmy Coonan to take over Mickey Spillane's action, then he could get the alliance back between the Irish and Italians that was going on really for years and years before Mickey Spillane got in this beef with the commission. So DeMeo takes out Mickey Spillane for Jimmy Coonan to take over the Irish organized crime on the West Side. And at this point, DeMeo expects to be made because of this. Okay. But what happens, Bill, is Jimmy Coonan is really ambitious. He doesn't just want to take over the West Side. He wants to start stepping into, there is a bookmaker by the name of Ruby Stein. Now, Ruby Stein was a Jewish gangster, and he ran really loan shark in New York for the five families. So he was a very powerful loan shark. So what happens now, actually, you know what, Bill, let's back up a little bit, because I want to get to, before I get to Ruby Stein, I want to get to how DeMeo and Coonan actually met. Mm-hmm. So what happened was there's a guy in DeMeo's crew by the name of Danny Grillo. Okay. Now, Danny Grillo, he was a gangster, but he had a job. He had a regular job. He was a sandhog laborer in the underground tunnel. Okay. And what happened is a lot of those, they typically employed at that time, a lot of, Irish Americans. So Danny would, after work, be drinking in the Irish pubs with these guys. And he ran into a lot of the Westies. So through that, they met him. They introduced him to Jimmy Coonan. So when Danny meets Jimmy Coonan, he sees this as a way to, make himself, more, better off with DeMeo by introducing DeMeo to Jimmy Coonan.
Yeah.
So they set up a meeting. What's that?
Networking.
Pretty much in their sense of the word. So anyway, they set up this meeting between Jimmy Coonan and Roy DeMeo, and they meet at a sewage treatment plant, Bill, near the East River. And and Coonan and DeMeo, when they first meet, Bill, it's like when me and you first met, we talked about mutual interests like New York, Boston sports, pro wrestling, stuff like that.
Yeah. These
two guys talk about dismembering bodies. I mean, that's their first thing out of their mouth, their conversation. This is where, like a blood tie between the two of them, mm-hmm. and a friendship and a real, like a partnership forms between the two. And Coonan starts telling DeMeo, they're both talking about doing the Houdini and the Gemini Method. And Coonan tells DeMeo, he said, listen, he said, the underwater currents swirling around the island, he said, were so fast that if you open up a body properly, which meaning you get the stomach and the lungs, you puncture it, He says it would sink and then sail past the southern tip of Manhattan out to the open sea, and then it'll never pop up to the surface. So all of a sudden, Bill, now you're thinking, now, why do you think they can't find half these bodies? Because this is what they end up doing.
Right.
So this is where Roy DeMeo and Coonan really, really form a bond. So anyway, let's get back to Ruby Stein. So Coonan and Grillo want to take out Ruby Stein. Now, did DeMeo know about this beforehand? I'm kind of not sure on that. I've kind of heard different information, but I know afterwards DeMeo was fine with it. I know that, like, he helped them cover it up. But anyway, what happens is they set Ruby Stein up, and true informants, one of the Westies, a guy by the name of Billy Beatty, said that what they did beforehand is they borrowed a ton of money from Ruby Stein. So 100,000 here, 200,000 here, 300,000 here. Everybody's borrowing. Billy Beatty said, it's obviously this guy's checking out. He said everybody knew it but him, because they're never going to pay these loans back. So what they do is they invited him into their club over in the west side of Manhattan. And they had Jimmy Coonan and 5 Westies and Danny Grillo. And they knew that Ruby Stein also always carried his black book with him, which was all his names of people that owed him money. And they wanted to get their hands on that. So when Ruby Stein walks in the bar, he sees, it was just supposed to be him, Grillo, and Jimmy Coonan, but he sees the other Westies there. He pretty much knows he's a goner. And Grillo shoots him, then hands the gun to Jimmy Coonan. Jimmy Coonan shoots him. And then Jimmy Coonan passes the gun around to the other Westies. And they shoot Ruby Stein, who's already dead. And each one of them take turns shooting him. And then they do the Houdini. And according to Billy Beatty, Bill, when Jimmy Coonan cut his head off, Ruby Stein, he passed it around and said to everybody, here, feel how heavy it is, like it was a basketball.
Ugh.
I mean, that's how vicious these guys were. So anyway, the thing is now they got a problem, though, because Castellano and the other 5 families, the other heads of the 5 families, Ruby Stein is their main guy. So they immediately know something is up when he's missing. And what happened was, though, when they disposed of the body, Jimmy Coonan didn't take his own advice that he gave Roy DeMeo, and he forgot to puncture the lungs and the stomach. So the body popped up. And now all of a sudden there's an investigation. And we're going to talk now about Joe Coffey, Bill, who I'm sure you're familiar with, the NYPD official who, I mean, he's got a resume, Bill, that's unbelievable. I mean, he investigated from the Son of Sam to the Westies, to the Gambino family, to Roy DeMeo, to Jimmy Burke from the Goodfellas. I mean,
and if
what a career he had.
If you've ever seen any of these documentaries about the New York Mafia, guarantee he's in. I think he passed away a few years ago, but guarantee he's, at some point you'll see his face.
He's in a bunch of them.
Yeah. And
he's the one that coined the phrase the Westies.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah, he's the guy that did it. So anyway, now, for the first time, Joe Coffey says we have an inroad into the Westies, because before we knew what was going on, but nobody would talk. Everybody was so scared of these guys. And just an interesting story from Joe Coffey about how feared the Westies were, Bill. He tells a story about how he was in his police precinct and he was downstairs talking to the desk sergeant. And this restaurant owner, this immigrant from, I believe, Greece, comes in and he says, I want to report that these 2 kids are shaking me down and they want me to pay protection money. So the desk sergeant's writing down the report. He's taking the names. He said, do you know who these kids are? And he says, yeah, the names are Jimmy Coonan and Mickey Featherstone. So Joe Coffey stops the guy and he says, hold on a second, hold on. He said, sir, could I give you some advice? And the restaurant owner's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, here's what you should do. Pay them.
Yeah.
And the restaurant owner's like, pay them. He says, you guys are the cops. And I'm telling you, I'm being shaken down and you're telling me to pay them? And Joe Coffey's like, look it, we could bring these guys in on this charge here, but they're going to be out within hours. Mm-hmm. And then you are probably going to disappear. I'm going to be honest with you. and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. So the best thing you could do is just pay them off and let us keep investigating these guys. And that's how feared, you know, the Westies were, Bill, in the west side of Manhattan. The bodies were disappearing left and right. And, you know, I told that story. Jimmy Coonan's walking in the bars with a guy's head that he just cut off, Patty Dugan.
Yeah. So
when the body pops up at Ruby Stein, and we did talk about this, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's worth repeating. Castellano realizes, you know, the Westies did this. So he's got a choice. You know, what is he going to do? He doesn't really want to go to war with these guys, even though they greatly outnumbered them. And the Westies really, Bill, they only had about maybe 40 to 50 guys, hardcore members, you know, but they had that whole neighborhood, you know, people that were fearful of them. So it looked like they had like a big army and stuff, but they really only had about 40, 50 guys. But you're talking about, you know, 40, 50 psychopaths. So you really don't want to go to war with them, no matter how many guys you have. So what Castellano does is he sets up a meeting, and first, you know, he talks to Roy about it because he's kind of leery about this. How much did Roy know about the Ruby Stein hit? So they set up a meeting at Tommaso's restaurant, okay? And Castellano wants to present Jimmy Coonan and Mickey Featherstone with as much firepower as he could possibly show them. So he has representatives from all 5 families there, Bill. He had Funzi Tari from the Genovese family. He had people from Lucchese, Bonanno, Colombo. And then he had all his top capos in the Gambino family there. So you had a powerhouse at the commission and all their top underlings there, Bill, to show these 2 young kids, you know, hey, you know, we don't want a war, but this is what you're going to be up against. But right. Coonan and these guys thought that they might try to take him out. So they had guys set up across the street that they were instructing them to come in firing with machine guns. They actually had a grenade, Bill. They were going to take out the whole block.
They had an arsenal.
They had an arsenal.
Yeah.
They did. They had an arsenal of weapons. And they were going to blow up the whole street, Bill. So anyway, what happens is they go in this meeting. Of course, Roy DeMeo's there, and Roy tells Jimmy Coonan, he said, listen, just deny everything. I'll back you up. Just deny it. We don't know anything about this. You know, who knows who killed him? We don't know anything about it. And just deny it. And we don't know where the black book is, even though Coonan and DeMeo steal the black book and they're taking money from all these guys that, you know, they're taking the money that was owed to Ruby Stein from these guys. Yeah. So the meeting goes on, and, you know, Nino Gadgi's there, the captain, and he says to these guys, listen, you gotta stop acting like cowboys. You know, and Castellano says the same thing. You gotta clear, anytime you guys do a hit, you gotta clear it with Roy, which is kind of funny, Bill, because like, right. You know, Roy DeMeo don't care who they're killing. You know, he's killing people and not telling Castellano.
Yeah.
So anyway, the meeting goes, and from their standpoint, good, and they have this partnership for him. And then from that, Roy DeMeo finally gets his button. He's finally a made guy because he brought the Westies, he brought them back into this alliance that the Irish and Italians had in New York going back 100 years. So he brought the peace back. So DeMeo gets his button. So now Joe Coffey finds out about this because they had these guys under surveillance, Bill. They're watching these guys everywhere.
Right.
And he's extremely concerned because this is the worst thing that you don't want these guys, an alliance between these guys. So Joe Coffey sets up a meeting with Castellano, and he sets up a private meeting at the same place, Tommaso's. And he says to Castellano, he said, look, we're hearing from people on the street that these 2 gangsters from the west side of Manhattan are talking to you, and there might be some kind of alliance there. And this is really concerning to us in law enforcement. And Castellano says to him, he says, yeah, I met with them. They're 2 nice Irish kids. He says, really good kids. Oh. He says, yeah, that's what he says to them. And Coffey's like, well, these guys are psychopaths, is what he tells Castellano. And he says, your best bet is to distance yourself from them.
Yeah.
He said, and can you tell me what exactly you guys talked about? And Castellano says, look, this is a private club. And what we talked about was private, just like our conversation now is private. So the Coffee's really concerned that this alliance between the Gambinos and the Westies. And what happens, and we talked about this on the Castellano episode, Bill, Westies go crazy. They're killing everybody. DeMeo's going crazy. Bodies are disappearing left and right. And, Castellano loses total control of his family. And it's just, there's so many stories about DeMeo, Bill, that are just absolutely vicious. And you talked about, Gambino talked about him on his podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The one that stands out to me, Bill, I don't know if you remember Gambino talk about this one, but he said that with the car parts, the stolen car ring that they had going on, he said he set up a meeting with DeMeo, and there was somebody else, I think somebody from DeMeo's crew, and they were there and they were going over the whole scheme that they had going on. And Gambino said that DeMeo wasn't really paying attention. He was like in and out, and he was like, they were daydreaming.
Yeah, and you have to kind of set up the rest of it. I do know the story.
Okay, so they go into this restaurant and they want to have a private conversation. So they ask for a section where there was all, this is Gambino's words, all old people,
right?
That can't hear.
People in their 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
And they can't hear anything that's going on.
And they don't know who these people are. They don't know what they're talking about. And that's exactly how they would want.
And that's what they wanted. So they could talk in private there.
Right.
So Gambino's, talking, and Roy's not paying attention. And finally Gambino says to him, he says, "Roy, is this stuff boring you? Are you bored?" He says, "I thought you were really into this car stuff." And he says, "This is important stuff. We're making a lot of money on this." And Roy's like, nah, I'm just thinking about something else. And then Gambino's like, "All right." And he continued to talk. And then all of a sudden, DeMeo says to him, he says, "Sammy, you really want to know what I'm thinking about?" And Gambino's like, "Yeah." He said, "What are you thinking about?" And he said, "I'm thinking about if I had 2 guns on me," he said, "I could take out all these people inside like 3 minutes." And Gambino's like taken back. He's like, "Kill all these people, all these old people? You want to take them out? Like, why?"
Yeah.
And Roy DeMeo's like, just because.
Yeah.
And Gambino just, he doesn't say anything to him because, he knows how DeMeo is. He's leery of him. So he's just like, wow. But this shows you, Bill, the underboss of the Gambino family, is taken back by how vicious DeMeo, he's going to take these people out for no reason.
And yes, that's an unbelievable story. But what you said before, when you're talking about Joe Coffey, the NYPD detective,
right?
He's warning a guy who, in 2 seconds, if he had the evidence to arrest him and put him in jail, he would.
Right.
And he's warning this guy that
stay away from the Westies.
Stay away from the Westies because they're vicious, and it just goes to show you the level of terror and viciousness and just unbelievable violence that they were capable of, where you've got the NYPD trying to protect these guys who are also vicious killers.
Yeah.
Just weren't on that level. It's just an unbelievable situation. And
it really is, Billy. It just, it's amazing.
You can't, you wonder how it could have gotten to that point. Like today, there's so many things that the FBI has at their disposal, that local law enforcement has at their disposal, where they can kind of rein in when things get that bad. But it was, if you haven't seen that documentary, what is it called? Fear City?
Fear City, yeah.
You got to watch that documentary, because New York at that time was so different than it is now.
And the interesting thing about that, Bill, the Fear City, I don't think they mentioned the Westies or Roy DeMeo at all.
No, I think you're right. And they were a level, many levels more vicious than what the Mafia was.
They really were. These two crews, Bill, and just to tell you how vicious they were. Once they took the DeMeo crew down, because we talked about on the Castellano episode, eventually Castellano orders DeMeo's crew to whack him. And then once they took him down, Bill, they went into the Gemini Lounge and they took apart the walls and they took the pipes out, Bill. And they said the pipes going up to the bathtub were so like entrenched with blood, Bill.
Ugh.
It was unbelievable. Like they said, they'd never seen anything like it, where it was just like drained right into the pipe itself, because there's so much blood running through them pipes.
God,
it was just. I mean, and the thing is, Bill, when you read those, if anybody really wants to read these books, or good books on this, the Westies by T.J. English and Murder Machine, and you really get into the detail of how vicious these guys were, and I mean, it's just unbelievable, the level of violence. And, eventually, Joe Coffey and his investigations, he would take these guys down eventually,
right?
And even the Westies. And what happened with the Westies, Bill, is Jimmy Coonan's crew, especially Mickey Featherstone, start to feel that he was getting too close with the Italian Mafia. And they were going to end up trying to take him out. And Coonan found out about this, and he set up Mickey Featherstone for a hit. He hit this other guy, Mickey Hawley, and he set it up to make it look like it was Mickey Featherstone. So then when Featherstone is brought in, Coffey and these guys tell him what happened, and they eventually get him to flip. And he testifies against Coonan and the rest of the Westies, and they take him all down. But, and the same thing kind of happened with the DeMeo crew. Once DeMeo was taken out, that crew had no leadership. So
right.
The law enforcement was easily able to take care of them at that point.
Yeah.
And, at some point we should probably do a show on Joe Coffey, Bill, and his entire resume, the stuff that he did.
This guy's a hero.
He is a hero, but you know what, Bill? He's an arrogant guy.
Well, sometimes you have to be. I mean,
I guess you do.
He was involved with so many of these investigations. He led these investigations, and he did tremendous work. And I think sometimes you have to have an ego in order to do stuff like that. I want to do an episode on how the NYPD and the feds were able to essentially take down the mafia in New York, and we'll highlight and talk about Joe Coffey and all of the things that he was involved with in that episode.
And I know a lot of people, Bill, there's been people out there that I've heard it on podcasts and stuff that said that, Coffey kind of, pumped his resume up more than it was, and he wasn't really involved in all these things. I did a lot of digging on that, Bill, and he's not making up anything. He was really involved in all these investigations. I mean, his resume speaks for itself.
Yep.
I mean, he's in, maybe he does have to be cocky, but he is an interesting interview, Bill. When you see him on these documentaries, like he comes off with some of the stuff he says is really funny.
Well, and when you're dealing with guys like Castellano and John Gotti, he was talking directly to these guys.
Sure.
You can't be, you can't seem like you're afraid of them or that you're whatever. You have to be on that level in order to talk to these guys.
And one of the things, Bill, he said an undercover agent inside the Westies, a guy by the name of Egan, Richie Egan, I believe his name was. I think that was his name. No, the last name was Egan, but he said, this guy afterwards, Bill, he had to go to a therapist after the stuff he's seen.
Yeah,
undercover. I mean, this is just, it was absolutely vicious, Bill, with these guys, and a lot of this stuff, you hear a lot of stuff is a legend, what's real, but a lot of the stories, I mean, they could be confirmed with testimony and police investigations that now the paperwork, they released all the files on them. And, I read a lot of this stuff, Bill, and it's just absolutely unbelievable.
And look at Donnie Brasco.
Right.
That undercover. I mean, that was
Joe Pistone.
He lost his family.
Well, he essentially had to become one of them, Bill.
Right.
In a sense, that was the only way he could survive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's probably an episode down the road too, Billy.
Yeah, definitely.
We could do, but just two stories, Bill. I want to just how vicious these guys were. There's one story in the book, in the T.J. English's book, about the Westies they killed this guy in New York, Ricky Tassiello, and then they dismembered him and cut him up. And Billy Beatty talked about when he testified, he was one of the guys that flipped after Featherstone too. And he said that when he was at Jimmy Coonan's house, he went in his refrigerator and he went in to get milk, and they had Ricky Tassiello's private parts in a milk carton, Bill. Now, what the hell were they doing and having it in the refrigerator? You know, it was just, but he said, this is the kind of stuff that was going on, the madness that these guys.
Again, that serial killer behavior. I mean, you look at
it really is. And one of the stories on DeMeo, Bill, and I haven't been able to confirm the story. I don't know if it's legend, but I believe I heard Joe Coffey say this. So I'm going to tell it anyway. But DeMeo orders his guys to do a hit on one of the guys that was involved in the stolen car parts. And he wanted this. He didn't want this guy to disappear. He wanted to send a message. So he wanted the guy to be found because he was worried this guy was giving information to the NYPD or the FBI, and he was an informant. So he sent his guys to kill him. And he says, you know, make sure there's no witnesses. Anybody sees you, take them out too. So they go and they kill this guy. And then they come back and they say to DeMeo, it's done. And he says, were there any witnesses? And they said, no, nobody's seen us. And then the other guy said, well, just the neighbor's dog. He was barking and stuff. And DeMeo says, I told you no witnesses. So he sent the guys back to kill the dog, Bill.
Oh my God.
I mean, what do you say to that?
That's sick.
Again, though, but how could the guy, though, like his son talk about him, he's a perfect father. You know, he comes home, he never brought that anger home. He never, it's just, you know, it's unbelievable.
Again, it's serial killer behavior. I mean, TK was the same.
TK, I think.
Same way. And they had lives and nobody knew what they were doing. And that was the way that they were able to keep doing it, is because they could control when they killed these people. They weren't like, you know, they weren't maniacs where they would just go off and.
Well, here's where I disagree with that a little bit, Billy. That's the case with DeMeo, but that's not really the case with the Westies. They were acting crazy all the time, Bill. I mean, they weren't hiding anything they were doing. Like they were going to bars, you know, with guys' heads, and
that's true.
And they were talking out, you know, they were like, these guys were just as ruthless as could be. I mean, they weren't hiding who they were, especially Jimmy Coonan.
Yeah.
You know, and Mickey Featherstone. Mickey Featherstone was a stone cold killer. I mean, so yeah, I mean, the Westies were an exception, Bill. They didn't care. But yeah, this is a disturbing topic, Bill. It really is. You know, it's something, you know, if you're gonna do the podcast on it, you got to do it right. You gotta tell how vicious these guys really were, so people understand. You know, they weren't your normal gangsters.
And we say this every time we do a show on these guys. We're not celebrating these guys at all.
Well, I mean, look at the fear that they had in New York, though, Bill. In that section of Brooklyn where DeMeo was, in the west side of Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen, which, you know, got its name from a beat cop who was walking a beat there, and he says, you know, this place is worse than the hottest section of hell.
Yeah.
And the Westies were the worst of the worst. I mean, just unbelievable, Bill. And I recommend anybody who wants to know more, you know, check those books out. The Westies by TJ English. TJ English is a great writer. And you see him on all these documentaries on mob stuff too, Bill. I mean, he wrote a great book on Whitey Bulger too, Where the Bodies Are Buried.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's a fantastic, and he wrote another one just strictly on the Irish mob called Paddywhacked. And it's a really good book. So TJ the English is a really great writer. And then the other book, Murder Machine, Bill, if you want to know more about the DeMeo crew, read that book, buddy, because it's vicious. And some of the victims were women too, Bill. I mean, they were killing everybody. A lot of the people weren't actually, some of the people, I should say, weren't actually involved in organized crime. I mean, they got in the wrong place, the wrong time.
Right. They were just in a club, or, you know, somewhere where again, what he said to Sammy the Bull.
Oh, Sammy the Bull, yeah.
He said, I would try, I got to keep these guys sharp.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they would just kill anybody. And I think there was definitely an element of racism as well, because a lot of the people that he killed that were not involved with organized crime were blacks, Puerto Ricans.
Well, there was the one DeMeo, he killed a door-to-door salesman. I believe it was Mexican, but DeMeo got in a beef. One of his guys got in a beef with a Cuban drug lord from Miami. And DeMeo was convinced that the Cubans put a hit on him. And this guy comes to his door, and he was just a young Mexican kid, the door-to-door salesman. And DeMeo thought he was a Cuban hitman, and he invited him inside, and then he killed him and he chopped him up. I mean, the kid was innocent. It had nothing to do with any organized crime activity,
Is that
that's in a book, Murder Machine.
And there's a story about a guy, Chris Rosenberg. Is that?
Yeah. Chris Rosenberg was he was a Jewish gangster that was in DeMeo's crew, and he considered Roy like a father to him. And he actually changed his name to Chris DeMeo. That's how obsessed he was with DeMeo. And he looked at DeMeo as a father figure. But DeMeo would end up taking him out, Bill, because Rosenberg got involved. It was actually over this beef with the Cuban drug lord. After the heat started to come down, Castellano told DeMeo that he's got to fix this, and there's only one way to fix it. So he ended up taking out a guy that was like a son to him.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Bill, they're absolutely vicious. I mean, these guys were they were a different level. I mean, and just imagine, Joe Coffey going to Castellano saying, you got to stay away from these guys. Like, really? I mean, it's unbelievable, buddy.
Yep.
But I think that's enough for tonight, buddy, because we're probably both going to have to take a shower after this episode.
I know I am.
But yeah, they were different level, buddy. Different level. Probably in the history of organized crime in America, buddy. I don't think you're going to find a more violent crews than the DeMeo crew and the Westies. I mean, if they're out there, let me know, because I've never seen it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Sean. I think maybe rivaled only by the Mafia in Sicily.
Well, that's a different level, Bill. And we'll do a show on those guys. I mean, that's a totally different level where they, even from the top guys, I mean, they don't, like you said, Bill, they don't distinguish between civilians and
right.
And, gangsters. Like, you're not a player, you're not a target. That don't apply over there. They kill judges and
right. Yep.
Anybody, witnesses, anybody gets in their way. They're a different level. And they got so many guys, Bill. They way outnumbered American Cosa Nostra. So, yeah, anything else, Bill, before we wrap it up, buddy?
No, but I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we got it out of the way, Sean, to be honest.
Well, it's another interesting thing, Bill, and I heard a lot of things on this. There's never been a really good movie on Roy DeMeo or the Westies. There's been some, and they really watered them down. Some of them make the Westies look like a bunch of punks that it's totally non-factual. And then like State of Grace was one of them. That was terrible, Bill. Totally made the Westies look like punks. And then there was DeMeo, Roy Liotta played DeMeo in a movie on The Iceman. Remember that one, Billy?
That's right. Ray Liotta played him. But that was, again, and we've talked about this too. Kuklinski, I mean, his involvement with DeMeo, I mean, there's really no evidence that
there isn't. He was DeMeo was shaking him down, Bill, a little bit, and there was only probably one meeting between them. And the thing is, like Michael Francis talks about this, he never even heard of Kuklinski when he was on the street. So all this stuff, now Kuklinski was a serial killer. There's no doubt about that. But
absolutely,
he made up the other stuff about the mob involvement. Like he didn't have any mob involvement,
right?
But that's the one thing, though, Bill. Like the movies, I heard there was overtures to make movies on the book The Westies and another on Murder Machine, but producers in Hollywood felt that, you know, they would have to water it down so much because, you know, if you did it true to the book, how violent they were, you know, it probably just nobody would want to do it.
Well, it'd be more of a horror movie.
It'd be worse than a horror movie, Bill.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, there's never been a good movie on either one, Westies or Roy DeMeo. Nothing that's worth seeing.
Well, you can listen to this podcast.
Yeah, if you want to. We're not going to hold it against you if you don't listen to this one. You know,
if you could stomach it. Yeah. All right.
All right, Billy.
I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're good. That's enough of that, Billy.
That's enough
out of you, buddy.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.